You wake in the morning with a mind already leaning forward. Before the body has fully risen, the thoughts are already reaching. What must be done? What might go wrong? What should have been different yesterday? This leaning is so familiar that it feels natural. Yet it is the source of most inner strain. The mind strains because it tries to carry what does not belong to it. You feel tension not because life is difficult, but because you believe you are responsible for outcomes that were never yours to command. You feel anxiety not because the future is dangerous, but because you assume it must obey your wishes. You feel frustration not because others are flawed, but because you expect them to move according to your design. This confusion is ancient. The remedy is simple but not easy. You must learn with precision what is within your control and what is not. Most people speak of control vaguely. They say, I can't control anything, or I must take control of my life. Both statements miss the mark. Control is not power over events, it is authority over judgment. Look closely at a single moment. An unexpected message arrives. A delay occurs. A person speaks harshly. The event happens without your consent. It enters your awareness uninvited. Yet something else follows immediately. An interpretation, a story, an impulse. The second movement feels automatic, but it is not forced. It is chosen, often without awareness. The event itself is outside your control. Your interpretation of it is not. Here is where clarity begins. You cannot decide whether it will rain tomorrow. You cannot decide whether others will approve of you. You cannot decide whether your efforts will succeed as planned. These belong to the order of the world, not to your will. But you can decide how you meet the rain. You can decide how much weight to give to approval. You can decide whether success or failure will corrupt your character. The difference is subtle but absolute. When you confuse these two domains, you suffer unnecessarily. You argue with reality as if it were negotiable. You treat chance as if it were personal. You say, this should not have happened. But the moment it happened, it became part of what is. Reality does not ask for permission. It unfolds according to causes older and wider than you. Your power lies elsewhere. It lies in the faculty that observes, judges, and chooses. It lies in the inner posture you adopt toward events. It lies in whether you respond with reason or surrender to impulse. This is not resignation, it is accuracy. Consider anger. You believe another person caused it, their words, their behavior, their neglect. But if their actions alone had the power to command your emotions, then everyone would react the same way. They do not. One person hears an insult and laughs. Another hears the same words and burns for days. The difference is not in the insult, it is in the judgment applied to it. You are not disturbed by things. You are disturbed by the meaning you assign to them. This does not make you weak, it makes you responsible. Responsibility here does not mean blame, it means ownership. You own your judgments, you own your intentions, you own the use of your mind. Everything else is on loan. Your body is on loan, your reputation is on loan, your possessions are on loan, your relationships are on loan. They may remain for a time, they may leave without notice. To demand permanence from what is temporary is to invite fear. To build your peace on what can be taken is to live guarded and tense. The disciplined mind does not cling, it cooperates. This cooperation is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not. You still act, you still choose, you still pursue what reason deems appropriate, but you do so without staking your inner stability on the result. You plant the seed, you tend the soil, you do not command the weather. When the harvest is good, you accept it without arrogance. When it is poor, you accept it without bitterness. Your worth does not rise or fall with outcomes. It rests in the quality of your intention and the steadiness of your judgment. This is why control must be defined narrowly. If you define it broadly, you will live in constant frustration. If you define it precisely, you will live in quiet strength. You control whether you act with honesty when deception would be easier. You control whether you restrain excess when indulgence is available. You control whether you respond thoughtfully when provoked. You do not control whether these choices are rewarded. You do not control whether they are noticed. You do not control whether they succeed outwardly. To confuse these is to bargain with fate. Fate does not bargain. Most anxiety comes from trying to manage results before they exist. You rehearse conversations that may never happen. You fear losses that are not present. You chase security in conditions that cannot be secured. The mind exhausts itself guarding imaginary futures. Bring it back. Ask quietly and repeatedly, is this within my control? If it is not, release it without hostility. If it is, attend to it without delay. This question is not a mantra. It is a filter. It strips life down to what is workable. It removes the false burden of omnipotence. It returns you to your proper role. You are not the architect of events. You are the steward of your will. When you accept this fully, something loosens. The body softens, the breath steadies. You stop fighting the shape of reality and begin shaping your response to it. This is where calm begins. Most people resist this distinction at first, not because it is unclear, but because it feels like a loss. The ego wants jurisdiction over outcomes. It wants assurance that effort guarantees reward. It wants certainty that good intentions will be met with good results. When this does not happen, the ego feels betrayed. It says, what was the point? It says, why bother acting well if the world does not cooperate? This question reveals the confusion. You did not act well to control the world. You acted well because it was within your power to do so. Virtue is not a transaction. It is a condition of the will. Once you understand this, disappointment changes its shape. It no longer attacks your identity. It becomes information, not a verdict. You see more clearly where effort belongs and where it does not. Consider effort itself. You can decide to work carefully. You can decide to prepare thoroughly. You can decide to show up consistently. You cannot decide that effort will eliminate uncertainty. You cannot decide that preparation will guarantee success. You cannot decide that consistency will be rewarded on your timeline. The world is not obligated to align with your diligence, but your character is obligated to align with reason. This is a quieter standard, but a firmer one. When you measure yourself by externals, you live in comparison. You scan constantly. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who received what you wanted? Comparison feeds resentment because it assumes a false scale of control. It assumes that outcomes are distributed according to merit. They are not. Outcomes are distributed according to countless variables, most unseen. To compare yourself by outcomes is to judge a book by weather patterns. Instead, measure what can actually be measured. Did you act with integrity under pressure? Did you restrain what harmed you, even when it tempted you? Did you speak truthfully when silence would have been safer? These are not abstract ideals, they are daily junctions. At each junction, control is present. At each junction, you either exercise it or abandon it. Abandonment often feels easier in the moment. Impulse promises relief. Reaction promises release. But impulse spends what it does not own. Reaction mortgages future calm. Discipline, by contrast, feels heavier at first. It asks for pause. It asks for restraint. It asks for the courage to let discomfort pass without fleeing from it. Yet discipline preserves what is yours. It preserves clarity. It preserves dignity. It preserves the capacity to choose again tomorrow. This is why control must be practiced, not merely understood. In theory, everyone agrees that they cannot control others. In practice, they try endlessly. They hint, they pressure, they rehearse arguments, they replay conversations long after they end. All of this is effort misapplied. You can offer reasons, you can state boundaries, you can act according to your values. You cannot force understanding. You cannot compel change. You cannot manage another person's inner life. When you try, you entangle your peace with their choices. Detachment here does not mean indifference, it means clarity of ownership. Care without control, concern without possession. This distinction allows you to remain humane without becoming hostage. The same applies to fear. Fear often disguises itself as preparation. It says, I am just being cautious. But notice how it behaves. It pulls the mind away from the present task. It fixates on worst-case scenarios. It multiplies possibilities without evidence. Fear is not focused on what you can do. It is focused on what you cannot prevent. This is the tell. Preparation addresses what is within reach. Fear obsesses over what is not. To regain control, narrow the field. Ask, what is the next reasonable action available to me? Not the perfect one, not the one that guarantees safety, the reasonable one. Then do it without drama. If more becomes available later, you will address it then. This is how a steady mind moves through uncertainty, step by step, without rushing ahead of itself. The future does not require your anxiety. It will arrive on its own. What it will require is your judgment when it does. By conserving your attention for the present, you preserve your strength. Many people exhaust themselves trying to feel secure. Security, however, does not come from control over events. It comes from trust in your ability to meet events as they are. This trust is earned, not assumed. It is earned each time you respond thoughtfully instead of reflexively. Each time you accept a loss without self-pity. Each time you choose principle over convenience. Over time, you learn something important. You can withstand more than you imagined. Not because you are invulnerable, but because you are adaptable. Adaptability is a form of control often overlooked. You cannot control what happens. You can control how rigid or flexible your mind becomes in response. A rigid mind breaks under pressure. A disciplined mind adjusts without collapsing. This is not optimism, it is realism. The world changes, circumstances shift, bodies age, plans fail. To demand stability from what is inherently unstable is to live in constant protest. Acceptance is not approval, it is recognition. Once you recognize what is, you can respond intelligently. Until then, you are fighting a phantom. Control begins where resistance ends. Not resistance to injustice or harm, but resistance to reality itself. You resist reality when you say, this should not be happening. You accept reality when you say, this is happening. What now? The second question restores agency. The first drains it. This is why clarity about control is liberating. It frees you from unnecessary struggle. It directs your energy where it can actually be effective. Your task is not to bend the world. It is to keep your reason upright within it. When this becomes your standard, life simplifies. Not because it becomes easier, but because it becomes clearer. And clarity is the beginning of peace. Clarity, however, must be renewed. It is not a single realization that stays with you permanently. Each day presents new temptations to forget it. Success tempts you to believe you are in control of more than you are. Failure tempts you to believe you are in control of less than you are. Both distort judgment. When things go well, the undisciplined mind says, I caused this. Pride grows. Expectations harden. You begin to assume continuity where none is promised. When things go poorly, the same mind says, I am powerless. Resentment grows. Avoidance sets in. You abandon effort where it is still required. Reason cuts through both illusions. You did not command success. You did not deserve ruin. You participated. You responded. You exercised your will within circumstances you did not choose. This perspective keeps you balanced. Balance does not mean emotional numbness. It means proportion. You feel joy without clinging. You feel disappointment without collapse. The measure is always the same. What belongs to me here? In moments of praise, what belongs to you is not the applause, but how you receive it. In moments of blame, what belongs to you is not the accusation, but how you examine it. Praise and blame are both external forces. They pass through you only if you allow them residence. If praise inflates you, it controls you. If blame devastates you, it controls you. Control is lost whenever your self-worth depends on what is said rather than how you act. This is why restraint matters even in victory, especially in victory. A person who believes outcomes define them becomes anxious to protect those outcomes. They fear loss not because loss is harmful, but because it threatens identity. The disciplined person builds identity elsewhere. In consistency of judgment, in alignment with reason, this identity is harder to damage. Consider loss itself. Loss is often described as something that happens to you, but more precisely, loss reveals what you attach yourself to as permanent. When something leaves your life, pain arises from the judgment that it should not have left, that it was owed to you. Nothing external is owed. You may prefer, you may value, you may care deeply. But ownership in the absolute sense belongs only to your will. This understanding does not make you cold. It makes your care cleaner. You can love without possession. You can commit without illusion. You can grieve without bitterness. Grief itself is not a failure of control. It is a natural response to change. What matters is whether grief turns into protest against reality or remains an expression of attachment that is slowly released. Release is not an event. It is a process of reorienting judgment. Each day you remind yourself, this was given. It was not guaranteed. I am grateful it was mine to experience. Gratitude is the companion of clear control. It arises naturally when you stop demanding permanence. Impermanence is not a threat once it is expected. The same logic applies to your body. You care for it, you train it, you nourish it. You do not command it to remain unchanged. Aging, illness, fatigue, these are not personal failures. They are features of a body that belongs to nature, not to your preferences. You still act responsibly. You do not surrender to neglect. But you do not attach your worth to physical condition. Your body is an instrument, not your essence. When you confuse the two, fear follows. Fear of decline, fear of comparison, fear of time. Time is not an enemy, it is a condition. You move through it whether you resist or not. What you control is whether you use the present moment well, not heroically, not dramatically, simply well. Well means attentive. Well means honest. Well means measured. This is where control becomes almost invisible. It no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment. You stop asking, how do I control this? You start asking, how do I meet this correctly? Correctness is quieter than force. Force tries to impose. Correctness responds. Force exhausts. Correctness steadies. This shift changes how you relate to ambition. Ambition itself is not the problem. Confusion about control is. If ambition seeks status, admiration, or dominance, it binds you to externals. Your mood will rise and fall with forces you cannot command. If ambition seeks excellence of character, it stays within your jurisdiction. You can always refine judgment. You can always improve discipline. You can always act more in accordance with reason. This ambition cannot be taken from you. Even in constraint, even in obscurity, even in failure. This is why inner freedom is real freedom. External freedom depends on permission. Internal freedom depends on clarity. No one can prevent you from choosing how you interpret events. No one can force you to abandon reason unless you consent. This does not mean others cannot harm you. They can. It means harm does not have absolute authority unless you grant it. Pain may enter the body. Loss may enter your life. But despair enters only through judgment. This is not denial of suffering. It is containment of it. Suffering expands when it is fed by narratives of injustice, entitlement, or catastrophe. It contracts when it is met with accuracy. Accuracy says, this is difficult. This is not the end of my capacity to choose. Even in extreme circumstances, this remains true. Your final domain of control is always the same. Whether you meet reality with reason or with resistance, resistance multiplies pain, reason orders it. This is why control is not about mastery of life, but mastery of self. The world does not need to change for you to be steady. Your expectations do. When expectations are aligned with reality, disappointment loses its sting. You expect uncertainty. You expect impermanence. You expect resistance. And so when they appear, you are not shocked. You respond. This response is calm not because you feel nothing, but because you see clearly. Clear sight is the root of peace. Peace does not come from arranging the world to your liking. It comes from no longer requiring that arrangement to be content. When you hold only what belongs to you, judgment, intention, response, and release what never did, life becomes lighter without becoming careless. You still act, you still care, but you are no longer at war with what you cannot change. That war was never winnable.